Good, Sanjay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, and welcome to all the people that are participating. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Mishpachas Graziani for supporting this share. Thank you, Rabbi Shimon and family, for setting it up. And we will now continue. So last week, we had a shorter, we didn't have enough time. We started talking about the Tzemach Tzedek. We're trying to get here to get a picture of what the Tzemach Tzedek had to put up with in his days, being Rebbe. So there was different things that he did, but one of the main things that we know from his life is that he was very involved in communal affairs, which means to help Jewish people, but not just in Russia and Ukraine and the surrounding areas, in Lithuania, which is called Volin, but the Yidden of Poland, the Yidden of Galicia, and Yidden all over the world to turn to him in many, many ways. But there were two main things I gather from the Vilenker Rebbe's writings. There were two main things that Tzemach Tzedek literally gave his life up on. One was the Maskilim, the Enlightenment movement, who literally fought tooth and nail to pull the Yidden, rip the Yidden away from Yiddishkeit, and Tzemach Tzedek had to fight them. And the other one was to help the Jewish people that were drafted into the army. This was one of the terrible decrees in the history of Jewish people, where they literally grabbed and captured and grabbed and drafted thousands of Jewish children and into the Russian army, and it was with one intention. The goal of the Tsar, who was a very religious, Catholic or Christian, I'm not sure what they were, and he wanted very much that he should have the merit, like he should be the one that they should say that he took so many Jewish children and converted them to Christianity. He failed miserably, but the Jewish people suffered because of that. They suffered for quite a few years. One of the things that happened in his days was the story of the Cantonists. Yeah.
So the Cantonism was only for Jewish kids, non-Jewish kids?
No, non-Jewish kids, they didn't have to draft. They took them when they were older. They went. And they didn't suffer. They went to the army.
They wanted it.
The Tsars were primarily Russian Orthodox.
What is that?
It's a Catholic.
One of the Makis.
It's like a Catholic. They get their own pool.
Yep. So the Goyim were also drafted, and they had enough people in their army. There was no wars going on in Tzemach Tzedek's days. So there was no reason to make a new draft and draft people that don't want to go to the army. There were Yidden that went to the army because for years they had a draft, and Lahavdol, the Goyim went, and they didn't have to suffer because they were fed well, they were treated nicely, and when they came out of the army, they got a stipend. What is it called? Like a social security from the government for all their lives. So the people were happy. The Jewish people were drafted. So at first it was from 18 years old, and there was really no reason. This was a decree from the Tsar Nikolai before the Tzemach Tzedek's days. Maybe he was still around, and he was keeping them for a very long time. And their goal was to try to rip him away from Yiddishkeit. But it didn't work because 18-year-olds go to the army. A Jewish 18-year-old goes to the army. He knows how to learn. He knows how to keep Yom Tov and Shabbos. So the Baruch Hashem, they survived, spiritually speaking. So the Tsar came out with a new horrible decree that they should take little children, aged 7 and 8 years old, and take them from their parents by force. How was the force done? So at first, they used to tell the communities, the community leaders had to, from every 2,000 Jews in the community, at least from every 2,000 Jews, they had to provide, I think, one soldier, and then they lowered it down to 1,000 Jews. So it was becoming a very big problem. If you had like 10,000 Jews, the 10 kids are being ripped away from their families. And the community had to provide it, and people tried to bribe the people, and people tried to buy the children out. So if you had money, somebody had money, they had a better chance. They didn't have money, they cried. All the Jews were in terrible distress. It was a very big disaster. In addition to that, so what happened was there were Jewish people who saw, some Jewish people, thank God not too many, but there were some Jewish people who were unfortunately evil, and they decided they saw an opportunity to make money. So what did they do? They would tell a guy who paid them money, a guy who was able to afford it, to pay them, and they'll get another kid for their kid. In other words, you understand? They'll take another kid from a poor family that can't pay them, they'll snatch them and provide them to the government. So they were called the chappers, kidnappers, unfortunately. And there's a story how two of these guys were very disgusting. Most of them were just, some of them were doing it for money, but this is a very evil thing to do. Sadly, the Tzemach Tzedek fought these people. He told the Chassidim all over to try and get rid of them by whatever ways and means they could. And there were two of them, unfortunately. Some of them knew that the Tzemach Tzedek is so against them, and they came to the Tzemach Tzedek for a din Torah. It's an actual story that happened. And I'm saying this now so you should know what we're dealing with. They came, the question is, why did they come to the Tzemach Tzedek? So there's two opinions that the Chassidim said. One was that they came literally to tease the Tzemach Tzedek. What's the word in English? To taunt him. And they wanted, And the other one is that they came with the intention that if he's going to tell them whatever he's going to tell them, they will inform on him to the government. They'll give a report to the government and have him make him trouble. It was a lot of terrible things going on in those days, sadly. So what happened was they came to the Tzemach Tzedek and they said, we have an argument and we would like you to make a psak din according to the Torah. They said to him, according to the Torah. What's the argument? They were kidnapping children and they have an argument about the money, what to do, how to divide it, because each guy thinks that he's owed more money. So we need a psak din according to the Torah, a ruling according to the Torah, he told Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek asked me, you want a ruling according to the Torah? He said, yes, Rebbe. And he said to them, it says clearly in the Torah, someone who steals another person and sells him, he steals a Jewish person. If a Jew steals a Jewish person and he sells him, his punishment is the death penalty. These guys backed out. They got scared a little bit. One guy died within a few days. Got sick. The other one took a few months. Both of them died, unfortunately. Yeah. That was their psak din, which they came to the Tzemach Tzedek. So the Tzemach Tzedek, in his Nesius, while he was Rebbe, he had to take care of this problem, which was such a major problem. We'll read a little bit about it. It was such a major problem. Tzemach Tzedek was involved, sort of, in English they would say, over his head in this matter, and we'll soon see what he did. The other...
Over his head means he couldn't manage.
Okay, so he could manage. Well, it was very tough. It was very tough with Tzemach Tzedek. You're right. The other thing that he took care of was the maskilim, as I told you, who tried to make changes in Judaism by force. And they were very powerful. They had a lot of friends in the government. They wanted to do, there was a few things the maskilim wanted to do. One was to create Jewish schools for children, their style of Jewish schools, and force Jews or make the government sort of entice them to go to their schools. And even in the schools that are regular cheder, they should make some changes in the way they learn, not according to the Kabbalah teachings and Hasidic teachings, but according to the way they like it. Like we learn with kids in a very holy way, which is passed down for thousands of years, Kometz Aleph O. They didn't want that. They wanted to make changes, God forbid. That the kids should learn it like the English alphabet or Russian alphabet, which is O, Bo, without the Kometz Aleph O, which every part in the Jewish education is so holy, it comes down, or came all the way from Sinai. To make any changes is just to try to rip the Jews away from Yiddishkeit. Anyway, so the Tzemach Tzedek had to fight them, which we will in Mitzvah Hashem try to cover in the next share, another share later on. Right now, I'm going to go to the story with the Kantonisten. So last week we spoke about, and I don't want to make a big repeat, to spend time. I'm going to go straight to the story, but it was about a letter that the Tzemach Tzedek wrote in the year Tov Reish Hey, approximately 18. Tov Reish Hey, I'll give you in a second. Tov Reish Hey is 1845 approximately. In 1845, Tzemach Tzedek wrote a letter to a chassid called Reb Velvel or Reb Vilenker. And in the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he told this story, he was trying to tell the story of the Kantonisten, but decided to also give us a little bit of background who this Velvel Vlinker was, and that's what I'm going to do now. And then he goes to the juicy part, to the actual story itself. But Tzemach Tzedek wrote a letter to this Velvel Vlinker, a letter that you don't usually find, very powerful, powerful words. He calls him my dear friend, my beloved friend. Please take care of wherever it is. He doesn't say no names. He just writes a letter to him to take care of this person. Remember our youth when we had such tremendous ava, such tremendous liking, and we were together. And this is all a secretive letter with only hints. But when Velvel Vlinker got it, he knew exactly what the Tzemach Tzedek wants. Had anybody intercepted this letter, they would have a very difficult, if impossible time to figure this out. So the Friedrich Rebbe tells us first, who is this Velvel Vlinker that the Tzemach Tzedek writes to him such a powerful letter that he doesn't write usually? This Velvel Vlinker was a brother. There were two brothers. They were called the Vilenkers, or Vilenkers. One was called Moshe Vilenker, the other one was called Velvel Vlinker. Now I want you to know that this Moshe was much older than his brother, maybe by 10, 15 years, 10 years, let's say. Again, it's a guess. And this Moshe Vilenker, the older one, Moshe was the older one, they were both from Vilna, from a very respected family of the Misnagdisha people. And Reb Moshe, the older brother, Reb Velvel was 10 years old when Reb Moshe did this move that we're going to talk about. Reb Velvel was 10 years old. His brother Moshe was already married with 2 children. So he was at least 20, maybe 25. That's why I'm saying at least 10 to 15 years older than him. When the Alter Rebbe came to Vilna for a visit, the second or third time that the Alter Rebbe came to Vilna, it was in the year 1781 approximately, Tov Kuf Mem Aleph, okay? So this Chassid, who wasn't a Chassid then, Reb Moshe Vilenker, later on he became a big Chassid Alter Rebbe. He was then a young man, a Litvisher, Misnagdisher young man with tremendous talents, knew how to learn very, very well, and he had certain doubts in the learning, in other words, questions that he couldn't find anybody to answer. So he heard that the Alter Rebbe came to Vilna. Everyone knew he was a genius. The Alter Rebbe is a very big scholar and knows how to learn, a goyin. So he went to the Alter Rebbe and he presented him with all his questions, question by question. The Alter Rebbe explained to him all the questions in such a concise, beautiful way that on the spot he became connected to the Alter Rebbe. He said, "This is my Rebbe," but he didn't right away become his chassid openly. He couldn't. It took him 2 months. The Alter Rebbe had left Vilna back to Lyozne, and this Reb Moshe Vilenker 2 months later, in middle of the night. It's a story that was told over from person to person. In middle of the night, he snuck out of his house. He started to rely that his wife's parents are going to take care of the family. Snuck out of his house, went by foot all the way to Lyozne, to the Alter Rebbe. When he came, the Alter Rebbe would test the person and see what his talents and learning are and put him into a class. He had a few classes, 3 levels of learning the Alter Rebbe had. So he put him in to Cheder Aleph, which I believe was the highest class. Class number 1 was the highest class. First degree. Yeah, first class, but it was the highest. So, but what happened? He was very happy. He attached himself to the Alter Rebbe, became a chassid. What happened was Alter Rebbe found out very soon that he snuck out of his house without permission of his wife. Alter Rebbe told him, "There's no way, I'm not giving you permission to stay in Lyozne." So he started begging the Alter Rebbe to at least let him stay there for 6 months, or half a year. And the Alter Rebbe allowed him for 6 months. He begged.
Let him stay?
Yeah, for 6 months. The chassid, his brother was called Reb Zev Wolf, Reb Velvel Vlinker. And Moshe was the older one.
Another story, someone that left his wife Huna. That's another story.
That's Loja the Kuma.
Yeah, yeah.
So his brother, the younger brother of Reb Moshe, was called Reb Zev Wolf, was 10 years old when this story happened.
The representative?
The Reb Zev Wolf, that Tzemach Tzedek, years later, wrote a letter to him to save somebody from certain death and imprisonment. And this Velvel was 10 years old when his brother disappeared. He must have been traumatized. A half a year later, after he disappeared, he came back, but he stayed for 2 weeks in Vilna, took his wife and his 2 children, and he told everyone, his friends and family, that the Eibishter gave him some good income in a different place. He didn't say what and when, and they all left. 15 years, says the chassid Reb Zev Wolf, the younger one. Who did he say it to? He told this whole story to his granddaughter's husband, Reb Velvel Vlinker's granddaughter's husband. Who was this husband of the granddaughter's husband? a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash maybe. His name was Rabbi Avrom Abbe Person. Person could be a name of a city, I'm not sure. And this Rabbi Avrom Abbe Person met up with the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, in the 1900s. He was still around. And he was a grandson, meaning through his wife, of this Velvel Vlinker. And Velvel was still alive when this guy got married to his granddaughter. So Velvel told him the whole story that happened, every detail. So he says like this, Rabbi Avram Abbe told us to the Frierdiker Rebbe that the chassid, his grandfather, let's call him his grandfather or great-grandfather? His grandfather, his wife's grandfather. So he said, for 15 years, said Rabbi Velvel Vlinker, I did not know what's happening to my brother Moshe. 15 years. And one day I found out that my brother Moshe is from the choicest top-level students of the Maggid of Vilna. Rebbe was still a Misnagid in Vilna. And since I grew up all my years between the Misnagdim, this caused me distress. I felt so bad. And another 2-3 years went by, says Rebbe. When they took the Alter Rebbe to prison, the officers of the Tsar to Petersburg, you know that year of Yutas Kislev, right? So by my friends in Vilna, it was a Yom Tov. Everyone celebrated. But me, my heart pained me. Because I had heard from the people in Vilna, from the Misnagdish Gedolim, who all praised my brother Moshe, that his knowledge in Torah was tremendous, and Yirah Shamayim, he had tremendous fear of Hashem, and all the people in Vilna praised him. So I knew deep in my heart that if he chose the Maggid of Vilna as his Rebbe, that Maggid of Vilna must be a very special, great person. So Reb Velvel felt bad when the Alter Rebbe was taken to prison. When the Alter Rebbe came out free, he was released from prison, the Hasidic community in Vilna became stronger. There's an actual story, which one day I'll try to find time, that how this Velvel met up with some Hasidim, but that's a different story. But he says that when the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, the Hasidic community in Vilna is the stronghold of the Misnagdim, became stronger. And from time to time, I used to visit them, says the Velvel Vlinker. When the Alter Rebbe moved, after he came out of prison from Petersburg, he moved away to a new city from Liozne to Liadi. When the Alter Rebbe moved to Liadi, I finally came to visit the Alter Rebbe for the first time in my life, and I stayed there for 9 months. And over there, that was the first time I saw my brother Moshe after 20 years not seeing him. 20 years, he says. The Chassid, Reb Moshe Vilenker, the older one, let's remember, Reb Moshe is the older one, and Reb Velvel is the younger one. This Reb Moshe was very respected and endeared by the Tzemach Tzedek. He was much older than Tzemach Tzedek, Reb Moshe. He came to the Alter Rebbe before the Tzemach Tzedek was even born. He came to the Alter Rebbe in 1781, which is Tov Kuf Mem Aleph. The Alter Tzemach Tzedek was born in Tov Kuf Mem Tes, 9 years before Tzemach Tzedek was even born. He already was learning Chassidus, Reb Moshe, the older one, and the Chassid the Alter Rebbe, and he was very beloved by the Tzemach Tzedek, who was much younger than him. Why? Because the Tzemach Tzedek didn't hear many Maimorim from his grandfather from the days before he was born. But who's going to teach it to him? So Reb Moshe Vilenker reviewed and repeated Maimorim from the Alter Rebbe from when he came to Liozne to the Alter Rebbe. And therefore, because the Tzemach Tzedek felt like he loved him very much and felt like he owes him, so because of that, Tzemach Tzedek agreed to Reb Moshe that when his brother Reb Velvel came to the Alter Rebbe by Liadi, Tzemach Tzedek agreed he's going to learn with his brother twice a week. He's going to be a chavrusa with him.
With the younger brother.
The younger brother Reb Velvel, you'll soon hear the difference in age, and to explain him Maimorim that the Alter Rebbe said every Shabbos. Tzemach Tzedek was a much higher level in Chassidus than the Reb Velvel. So he's going to explain it to him. Reb Velvel was in his 30s, and Tzemach Tzedek was 15 or 16 years old. And he agreed to learn with Chavrusa with Reb Velvel, who's so much, double his age. And to explain to my mom. What?
He's still a young guy, 30.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that how Moshe sort of begged the Tzemach Tzedek to learn Chavrusa with his brother. According to Rabbi Avram Abba Person, who told this over to the Frierdiker Rebbe when the Frierdiker Rebbe was only 12 years old, Tafresh Nun Beis, which is, what's Tafresh Nun Beis?
92.
1892, right? The Friedrich Rebbe was only 12 years old. So he says that Rebbe from Abba at that time told me the age of Tzemach Tzedek was 16 or 17 years old, and Rebbe Wolf was 30 years old. I made a little mistake. Okay. Now, yeah, what?
You made it right.
I said almost right. Yeah. Next. So now, says the Friedrich Rebbe, let's talk about that letter from the Tzemach Tzedek. Who told the Friedrich Rebbe about that letter from the Tzemach Tzedek to save a certain Jew out of prison and death? Out of prison, let's say, okay? Who told this to the Friedrich Rebbe? It was the same Rebbe from Abba person. Why? Because it's his grandfather, his wife's grandfather, Vilenker, who got that letter from the Tzemach Tzedek. His grandfather. And he told Rebbe from Abba, his grandson, which means his granddaughter's husband, all the details about this letter. And he explained in the letter. We'll soon see what happens here. So he says, concerning that holy letter from my great-grandfather Tzemach Tzedek, says the Friedrich Rebbe, which I heard from the Chassid Rebbe from Abba person. When did I hear it from him? In Tufresh Tzemach Aleph. Now the Friedrich Rebbe is already 21 years old. 1901. We met together in the great city, in the big city of Warsaw, Poland. The Friedrich Rebbe was there. And the Rebbe from Abba told me that my great-grandfather Tzemach Tzedek wrote that letter in the year Tufresh Hey, which is 1845. 1845. And this was 2 years after the Tzemach Tzedek was, I'll say the word forced, but he was really invited, so to speak, by the government of Russia, by the Tsar, to come to a special conference, a rabbinic conference of Rabbanim in Petersburg in the year 1843. So remember, 1843 is when the Tzemach Tzedek goes to Petersburg, and I'll give you a little bit insight what happened there. 22 times that Tzemach Tzedek was put into prison. I said 22.
During the conference.
During this conference, because he stood up against the government and the maskilim. And some of all the times were dangerous, but some of these imprisonments were literally, they considered him as a rebel. Treason, is the word, treason? They charged him with treason. And he was, anyway, but that's going to be, we'll talk about that. That's another part that we have to discuss. So 2 years after that meeting, that conference, is when the Tzemach Tzedek wrote this letter to the Velvel Vlinker. Please remember our tremendous closeness and save, it doesn't say who, save that person from prison, which we're going to detail it. This letter, says the Friedrich Rebbe, was written in great secrecy because of the terrible fear that they had from the Tsar's government in those days. Because it was already 4 years, 2 years before the conference, 2 years after, it ended up being 6 years, that they settled in Lubavitch, a small, tiny city, as big as Postville or less. In Lubavitch, they sent over an officer from the Tsar's ministers, who was considered, and he was from the army and police. They had a special, what is it called? A special arm from the government. It was called the third something. The third. It was like the forerunners for the KGB. They were the secret police of the Tsar to find if anybody rebels against the Tsar. This guy was called a gendarme from the second degree in the high, almost the highest level. Yeah, they sent him to live in Lubavitch, a small, tiny little village. They sent him to live there to keep an open eye on all the comings and goings of the Tzemach Tzedek. And therefore, the Tzemach Tzedek, everything he did was in the greatest top secrecy. Could you imagine? Which we'll talk about. It's terrible. You will soon hear one of these days how the Tzemach Tzedek ran the system that he had to help the Jewish people and he shouldn't be caught. He ran, they say it was so organized, like the CIA, like an army. He had 5 Hasidim, and everything was on need to know, and nobody knew that these 5 Hasidim, they were the greatest Hasidim from the Alter Rebbe's days yet, nobody from the Hasidim knew that these Hasidim, every directive they're getting is from the Tzemach Tzedek. Nobody. They told everyone that Tzemach Tzedek, he can't afford to get involved in community things. He has to take care of things and so on. He's not getting involved in any community matters. You have a problem, go to your Rav, or we'll try to help you. And the problems were major. And these Chassidim helped them with directives of the Tzemach Tzedek, but it was all secret. Anyway, so therefore the Tzemach Tzedek wrote this letter in great secrecy. Help this person, doesn't say who. This is what the Friedrich Rebbe interjects here. He says, why did they send such a high officer to Lubavitch to spy on the Tzemach Tzedek? because in the year Tafresh Beis, 1842, a year before that conference, it was found out by the governor of Vitebsk. Over there, governor means the guy who's in charge of everything, police and everything else. So these guys were very involved, the Tsar's people. The governor of Vitebsk is a large Jewish community. A Jew by the name of Yisrael Yehuda the kidnapper from a city called Bichov came to the governor to inform on the Tzemach Tzedek. What did he inform? Unfortunately, they did have spies, the Maskilim. The Maskilim had most of the spies. And they were so vicious and cruel and evil that they didn't care what's going to happen to the Tzemach Tzedek. They knew that Tzemach Tzedek's life is in the balance, but they didn't care. So this guy was a kidnapper, not a maskil. Maybe it was a maskil too.
He was a chopper.
A chapper. He went to the governor and said that the Tzemach Tzedek had sent a chassid called Reb Arn of Bilinich to all. The Tzemach Tzedek sent him on a mission to all the communities in the counties of Mohilev and Vitebsk, where most of the leaders were chassidim. And the Tzemach Tzedek said they should get rid of all the kidnappers. Get rid could mean a lot of things. And they should get rid of them, and they should excommunicate them, because they started kidnapping children again after a 2-year lull, a 2-year hiatus. The governor of Vitebsk, who was a representative of the Tsar, informed the interior minister in Petersburg, and this is the reason. The interior minister, who was a big Jew hater, all of them come out, and he was the one, because of this story, where they informed on the Tzemach Tzedek, which that means that Tzemach Tzedek is actually going up against the Tsar. Because who made the decree to capture the Jewish children? The Tsar. And the kidnappers were given power by the government, even though they did something disgusting. So the interior minister, this was the reason he called the Tzemach Tzedek for the first time in the year 1843. It started in May and ended in July or August. It was supposed to be a 10-day conference, ended up being 6 weeks, or more than 6 weeks. Which is all a story in itself, which it can make your hair raise up because of what happened over there by this conference. So this is the reason he called the Tzemach Tzedek and invited him for this conference. What was the real reason behind it? Nobody knew, but this reason was to accuse the Tzemach Tzedek of treason, of being rebelling against the Tsar, and do all kinds of troubles for him. It's amazing what was happening. In a way, you see the Hashgacha Pratis, the big miracles of Hashem, but every miracle costed a lot. It was great miracles in the end. Let's continue further. Because the interior minister didn't want people to realize that he's calling the Tzemach Tzedek for a negative, for a bad thing, so the ministers of the government said, let's make it all, we'll cover it up. And we're going to say that we want to get a conference of rabbis, 4 rabbis that will represent all levels of Jewish people in Russia, Galicia, Volyn, which is Lithuania, and Ukraine. That because the Tsar controlled all of this almost. And we're going to say that it's a conference about, Judaism, Jewish education, Hasidic teachings, and also there was for that in those days they also closed down all Jewish printing presses except for 2. They closed them all down because of also information and accusations by the Maskilim. But that's a different story. It's all taking place at the same time, and therefore the minister said, we're going to invite 4 rabbis. 1 rabbi will represent the Chassidim. 1 rabbi will represent the Misnagdim. 1 rabbi will represent, there was another class of Jews for them, Jewish business people. And the 4th person will be representing the Maskilim, and the people were the Tzemach Tzedek. I'm just going to say it so we know it for next time. And the Reb Yitzchak Volozhiner from the Misnagdim. He was a son of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, who was one of the greatest students of the Vilna Gaon. This guy was very close to the Tzemach Tzedek. Very close. He had a special feeling for the Tzemach Tzedek, and so Reb Chaim also, but he was earlier. And the 3rd guy who was representing Jewish business people was a Jewish wealthy person, a very big businessman, maybe a millionaire. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Halperin. He came from either Galicia, Poland. And for the Maskilim, they got a certain Jew by the name of Dr. Betzalel Stern. This Dr. Betzalel Stern, in all the writings of the Vilenker Rebbe, is dealt with very respectfully because he helped the Tzemach Tzedek in the end, even though the Maskilim didn't want this to happen. And not only that, but he became about Tshuva in the end of his life. Why? Because he was so impressed with the Tzemach Tzedek. I don't want to give you all the secrets from what's going to happen later. So let's continue. Huh? Spoilers. So what happened, says the Frierdiker Rebbe, in that conference of rabbis, is a whole story in itself. And from that time that they made this conference, they sent from the government a special officer for like a detective, whatever, it was a high officer, to spy on the Tzemach Tzedek. They had Jewish people also spying on Tzemach Tzedek. Thank God, one of the main ones never figured out what's going on. Thank God. But he was a spy. For a long time, he was living in Lubavitch as a chassid. He acted as a chassid. And this all didn't help, says the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek did not pay any attention. He did what he had to. And what was that? To send out, secretly, chassidim, to strengthen and encourage the Jewish cantonists. That's the Jewish soldiers who have been serving already for so many years. They should keep Torah and mitzvahs. And he also sent messengers. This is the more treasonous thing. He sent messengers to try and release, and buy out young cantonist children and bring them back to Yiddishkeit, bring them back to the Jewish community. They were kidnapped against their will. So Tzemach Tzedek would send people. Now later on, we'll try to talk a little bit more about the details to get these people to sell children. They were paid by the government to keep these children and to rip them away from Yiddishkeit. The Tzemach Tzedek had to raise literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of rubles. So to send people to these farmers, Goyish farmers, who kept these Jewish children in far-flung cities and villages and entice them, bribing them with money. It was a lot of money to get them back, and they would let them go back. They would just write a report that children died. And the government didn't have a chance to. But we'll talk about that. It's a whole parsha. We're going to just touch the tip of the iceberg today, Mr. Shem. So the Tzemach Tzedek did all these things, but in 1845, this is when Tzemach Tzedek wrote that letter, in 1845, which is Tafresh Hey.
You want to drink from that, better spill it down the sink.
Here, take this one. Look.
What? No, but you stuck the tissue in here.
Shit,
Right.
take it away to the sink. Pour it out.
Later.
Thank you. So what happens is in the year, I'll give it to you. In the year Tafresh Hey, which is 1845, a terrible tragedy happened to one of the Tzemach Tzedek's messengers by these children, whose name was Reb Chaim Yeshua from the city of Kalisk. We mentioned it last week, but here comes the more details of the story. He was caught. Where was he captured? Where was Reb Chaim Yeshua captured? He was captured in a small village called Kastareve, which is near Kazan. I don't know what Kazan means, if it's the name of a city, but I guess it was. This is deep in Russia. And over there, he paid money to farmers, Goyish farmers, that the government would send these children to train to go to the army. They weren't in the army yet. They were 7, 8 years old, just to train them how to eat non-kosher and to rip. They would take their tzitzis and burn it in front of them, their sedurim. They were very, very cruel to these children. So Chaim Yeshua, this chassid, was far away there with a lot of money, buying back these children. And unfortunately, he was caught. 4 months, this chassid Reb Chaim Yeshua was living in a city, Kazan. I don't know again, I'll call it Kazan as if it's a city. He lived there. And Reb Chaim Yeshua acted as a villager who was a businessman buying, farm stuff, buying cheeses, buying, hay and wheat and whatever, corn. And he knew the nature of all these villagers and farmers of Chaim Yeshua over the years. He did this for the Tzemach Tzedek. Obviously, he did it for the Inyan. And he would go from village to village to buy back children. And as soon as he would buy them out from the farmers, the children, some of them, he would tell them to just run for their lives. They would run to a Jewish community. Some of them he had to take care of. They weren't yet sufficient. Some kids were older already. They could run and go to hide in a Jewish community. And some of them, he had to find places for them. He did it in a very wise way. As soon as he would come to a village of Chaim Yeshua, he would start buying from the farmers stuff that they grow, corn, flax, and so on. And this, he would say to them, this is why he came, because he's a businessman. He does that. And while he's at it, he would find out the situation of the children, how they're doing, how many children are there, what is being done to them. In the first place, how did he find out B'chlal, in which city there are children? They had other Hasidim in the bigger cities who would bribe army people to tell them where these children were sent. It was a whole operation. One day, while Reb Chaim Yeshua was in one of those villages, a Jewish man came, spoke Litvische Yiddish, perfect Yiddish, and he also came to do business with the farmers. You hear this? And he became friendly with Reb Chaim Yeshua. Reb Chaim Yeshua never met this guy, but he was an honest person, Reb Chaim Yeshua, and the guy was acting very nicely. And this guy was actually ambushing Reb Chaim Yeshua. He was actually a musser from the government. The government sent him. Reb Chaim Yeshua, slowly, this guy found out from Reb Chaim Yeshua everything he does for the children, the Cantonists. At this time, Reb Chaim Yeshua had in his possession, meaning to say he already redeemed 8 children. And he was trying to figure out what to do next, because like I said, some he would send to different places, some he would let them run. And some of them were in his place, at his host, in the city of Kazan, with Reb Chaim Yeshua. And some were going to other people, which they found over there, to eat by them and so on, Jewish people. And this businessman who spoke a Lithuanian Yiddish started giving him advice. And he set up 6 children should stay in Kazan, and 2, Reb Chaim Yeshua said, I'm taking with me to the house, to my house. The day he was to leave the place to go home, back to where he lives near Kalisk, suddenly 3 army officers arrived, fully armed, together with this Lithuanian Yid who spoke Yiddish, and they arrested Reb Chaim Yeshua in chains. The children saw it in advance that they're coming to arrest him. All 8, Baruch Hashem, ran away for their lives and never to be heard of again, in a good way. And they also went and told their friends that were in different parts of the city. Everybody disappeared. And they went back to Yiddishkeit, to some Jewish communities. For 7 months, the government of Russia, the army, took Reb Chaim Yeshua from prison to prison in chains until finally they arrived in the city of Vitebsk, which is a large city. And in the city of Vitebsk, the governor was so angry that this man rebelled against the Tsar that he said he's going to make him a military tribunal, which was a sure sentence of death, a death sentence, because the army is stricter.
That's where we're in today.
And that, no. And this was the letter that Reb Tzemach Tzedek sent to Reb Velvel Vlinker to save this chassid, Reb Chaim Yeshua, and it was a secretive letter. Now this letter, says the Vilenker Rebbe, I didn't see it until 1908. I met Avram Abba person again in the city of Königsberg, which I think is in Germany. And this time, so a few years later, Avram Abba had either the actual letter or a copy of it, and he showed it to me. And this Avram Abba was a very calculated, smart person who knew how to learn very well. And he used to chazer Tanya Balpeh, Mishnayos Balpeh, and there was not a single mistake he would make. Every single letter and every single word. And he knew the whole Chamisha Chumshei Torah and the whole Tanakh he knew by heart. And in the same way he would say Mishnayos and Tanya Balpeh very calmly, that's how he read a holy letter from any of the Rabbeim. He would explain it, and every single letter he would explain what it means and stories behind it. And every story that he said was accurate with all the names, not just names, but nicknames of the people mentioned in the story. And every time he would say a story, he would say it patiently, like someone reading the Megillah, sort of. And when I used to hear a story, says the Vilenker Rebbe, who's now 1908, Tafresh Samach Ches, the Vilenker Rebbe is 28 years old, already with his family, Says the Vilenker, when I used to hear a story from this chassid of Avram Abba, it would have such an effect on me. It was as if I'm living in that time of the story and in that place. Everything would be imagined in my mind, mamish in front of my eyes, he says, as if I'm seeing it myself, witnessing it myself, living it myself. And this is the story that Avram Abba told me about the letter of my great-grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek. Avram Abba said to me like this, he says, remember a few years ago when we met in Varsha, in Warsaw, and I told you about this letter? This is the letter, and I'll explain to you word for word as I got it from my wife's grandfather, Velvel Vlinker himself. And this is the story. We'll just say a few more sentences. When they brought the Chassid Reb Chaim Yeshua from Kalisk, locked in chains to Vitebsk, there was an old Chassid in Vitebsk called Reb Gavriel Noisechein. He was a millionaire, a gem dealer. He lived to 110 years old. He had a blessing from the Alter Rebbe. This Reb Gavriel was very close to all the ministers and governors. He had them all in his back pocket. They all used to buy jewelry from him. But at the time they brought Reb Chaim Yeshua to Vitebsk, this Reb Gavriel wasn't in town. He was a very old person. He went to a wedding in the city of Shklov to a grandson of his youngest son. A grandson of his youngest son was getting married. That's how old Reb Gavriel was. And he was there for a few months.
One second, Gabriel didn't have children for the first 25 years.
25 years of his marriage, right?
So, after his 25 years, now his youngest son's grandson. That's how old he was.
Yes, exactly. It's amazing. 110 years. When he came back to Vitebsk, this Reb Gavriel, they already, Velvel Vlinker already had an effect on the
Guys,
governor.
notice there's a class over here? Thank you.
Say thank you for the water by being quiet, please. Or else next time we'll have to charge you for it. So what happened is that when Reb Gavriel came back to Vitebsk, he also, Velvel Vlinker wanted him to help out since he's close to the governor. But at that time, Velvel Vlinker already had an effect on the governor that at least they're not going to do a military court, military tribunal, but they're going to give him over to a regular court. Yeah, and that was a good news. Anyway, when Gavriel came back, he actually affected that the governor should literally release Reb Chaim Yeshua quietly. The condition was nobody should know about it. No ankle bracelets. Nobody should know about it, and that he should disappear. Reb Chaim Yeshua should disappear from Vitebsk. For 3 months, Reb Chaim Yeshua was in Vitebsk in the prison until the governor let him go because of Gavriel. And as soon as they let him go, the Tzemach Tzedek sent him a nice amount of money to start doing business. And he told him to go live in a city called Gluchov, far away. And the Tzemach Tzedek benched him. And Reb Chaim Yeshua lived 25 years in the city of Gluchov. He had a good income, very nice income. And from time to time, he used to go to Lubavitch to Tzemach Tzedek. And after the Tzemach Tzedek's passing, he went to the Rebbe Maharash. And now is going to start the story of Reb Chaim Yeshua. This is just an introduction to the story of Reb Chaim Yeshua. So in Mirz Hashem, next week, with God's help, because it's a very hair-raising story.
Gabriel Noisechein, the bracha he got from the Alter Rebbe was his whole very long story, but in short,
It's
he
just the
needed a
beginning.
bracha for Parnasa, and